So we just got back from an incredible morning at Mesquite Dunes. The dunes were fantastic. The clay pack was incredible. Let's take a moment to take a look at some of my favorite images, and then we'll walk through the editing process from start to finish so that we can see how to make our images have more impact and closely match what we imagined them to be and how they made us feel while we were on location. The image that we're going to look at first, you can just see it just looks a little flat. It's not like how I remembered it. I remembered it being much more impactful. So I'm just going to start with the light panel, and I'll want to make sure that I've set my color profile to landscape because that's going to add a little bit of contrast to the image. And let's start by just clicking auto. And already we can see that that's made a big change to the image, but we can always adjust these sliders further. So let's say that I want to make my blacks even darker to add a little bit more contrast. And maybe I want to make my whites even lighter. And I'm watching the histogram up here to make sure that I don't clip them to pure white or pure black, but they're looking much better now. I couldn't get any higher or lower on the dune in order to remove the area in the upper right. So I went ahead and took the photograph knowing that I can remove this using any of the healing tools. So I'm just going to select that, and I'll make sure that I'm using this generative AI. Then all I need to do is grab a brush and paint over the area that I want Lightroom to replace. It puts an overlay, and then I'll just choose remove. And this is going to use the generative AI technology, so it's going to go up to the cloud and create and fabricate completely new pixels in order to fill that area, because the whole image is about this beautiful circular line, and I didn't want to crop it. It's also given us 3 different variations, so we can cycle through those to see the one and choose the one that we like the best. This is what I love about Lightroom, because when you're in the field and you're capturing your images, there might be just one little area that you're not really fond of. And Lightroom is going to help us to remove that area and reach our creative vision much quicker than ever before. All right, let's move to the second image of the hard clay pack at the bottom of the dunes. We can see that the image is quite flat. I'm going to want to extend the dynamic range as well as add some contrast to it. The profile is set to Adobe Landscape, just like last time, and I'll start by moving the white slider over to the right in order to increase the white values. I don't want to go too far and push them to pure white, so I'll just back off till about there. I'm just referencing the histogram here to make sure that I'm not clipping a bunch of values to the very far right. All right, then I'm going to use the black slider and scoot this down a bit to the left, taking our darker values even darker. Now, before I add any additional contrast, I want to use the crop tool to just crop off a little bit from the top of this image. Now, for me, this type of image is all about the complete shapes within the larger frame. But I did shoot this, I feel, a little bit too wide. There's a little bit too much going on here at the top. So I'm just going to drag down the anchor point into the image area and just scoot this over to the right-hand side, just looking to see where all of the edges and then these little sand rivers appear around the image. All right, I like that, so I'll go ahead and tap Return or Enter to apply that. Now we have 2 really large distracting areas, this footprint over here on the left and then this in the foreground. So let's switch to our Remove tool, and I'm going to start with it set to remove, and I'm going to use the generative AI. Then I'm going to paint right here to remove that area of the footstep. All right, and then I'll paint again right on this side of it. You can see that I have 2 areas here that have the overlay, but they're not actually touching, so they're 2 separate areas. All right, then let's paint down here. This is going to be a rather large area. I actually want Lightroom to fill in this whole area. Of course, I can release my cursor and then paint again until that is all filled in, and then I'll choose to remove this. Now, the reason that I painted in 3 different areas that weren't touching was to enable Lightroom to actually render 3 different areas using generative fill. If all three of those areas were touching, then Lightroom would have to create just one solution. And because the resolution of the generative fill isn't as high as the resolution in this image, it might have had to have interpolated up the information. But if I show the overlay on hover, we can see that there's 3 pins now. So whichever pin I click on, I can then see the variations for that pin. So this pin, for example, is only affecting this small area. So Lightroom wouldn't have had to interpolate up that information. So I've got the best quality. All right, then there's this pin. Let's make sure we're picking the best option. I liked that second one, so I'll go back to it. And here we have our third pin. I think that looks just great. Now, I typically would go in, I'd zoom in to 100%, and I would go through the entire image and remove all of these smaller distracting elements as well. But because they are smaller, I can probably get away with not using the generative AI. So I would just switch to the healing brush, and then we can click over any of these and have Lightroom correct it for me. If we don't like the area that it has chosen to duplicate, we can reposition it by dragging it in the image area, or we can click on the refresh icon. So I'm not going to take the time to do this right now. It would probably take 5 minutes, and I can't think of anything more boring. So for now, I'll go ahead and just zoom out, but I would go through the entire image to remove those distracting elements. All right, to darken down the edges, let's return to the Edit stack. I'll come down to Effects, and then under Vignette, I've used the disclosure triangle. I'll add a dark vignette, and then we can change the midpoint as well as the roundness of the vignette and the feather. Finally, to give this a little bit more snap, I'm going to increase the texture. That's going to make the appearance of the image sharper, add a little bit of clarity, and let's see what dehaze does. I like the way it's taking the tonality of the sand darker, so I'll go ahead and set that up to somewhere around 23 or so. Excellent. Let's use the backslash key to show a quick before and after. All right, let's move to this next image of the paw prints. Like before, I have the profile set to Adobe Landscape, and I'll use the light panel in order to increase the brighter areas of the image. I'll also take up the exposure a bit, and then take down the blacks to give us a little bit more contrast. I want to darken down the lower left area here, so I'll switch to my masking, select my linear gradient, and then click and drag up into the image. In the light panel, while I might be tempted to use exposure, I actually think that makes this whole area too dark. So instead, I'm going to bring my whites down just a little bit and then primarily use the highlight slider to bring down those values. But it looks a little bit too yellow. There's not enough blue in that area, so I'll use the color option and then move the temperature slider over to the left. Now that matches the blue in this area here to the rest of the image, but I actually don't care for the blue that we're getting from the early morning light as the sun comes across here and gives us those bluer shadows. So let's return to the Edit stack. I'll choose Color, and then we'll use the color mixer. Now, if I'm not sure if this is blue or cyan, I can choose the Targeted Adjustment tool, make sure that I'm affecting the saturation, and then just click over the color that I want to change. So I'll click in the blue and drag to the left in order to remove it. If I drag to the right, that would add more blue. But again, I'll go ahead and remove almost 100% of it. All right, let's put the tool back. And I want to remove this crack in the lower right-hand corner. So we'll switch to the Remove tool. I'll choose Heal, get a little bit larger brush with the right bracket key, and then just paint over this entire area and let Lightroom heal that for me. If I don't like where it's selected automatically, we can always choose Refresh. I think that looks a little bit better. And then I'll add just a white vignette by returning to the Edit stack, scrolling down, using Effects, and this time moving the vignette to the right, the midpoint to the left, as well as the roundness and the feather. Now, I think that the dog prints would be pretty obvious, but if we think they're a little subtle, we could return to our masking. I'll select the plus icon and choose a brush. I'll zoom in, and with a small brush, I'll just paint right inside of this paw print area here. We get the red overlay that tells me that that area is going to be changed. I'll use the light panel and just bring down the exposure. We can zoom out and then zoom into the next paw print area. Again, I'll just paint around that area. And while I'm zoomed in here, I'm also going to make a little fix with my healing tool. I'll come in here with the healing option selected and just drag right around here and see if it can't get rid of that and duplicate it or fill it in with additional sand. All right, I like that. I'll zoom back out, zoom to this one. We can return to our mask. I'll select this mask 2, which is the brush, and we can continue painting, filling in this area and just making it a little bit darker to make it a little bit more obvious that this area is indented. And then one more time down here at the bottom, I'll just paint again, and just fill these in. And then I might return just one more time back to the healing, click in here, see if we can't get that filled in with more sand, and this as well, just to get rid of that distracting little element and making the paw print a little bit cleaner. Excellent. If I think I've gone too far, we can always return to the mask, selecting the mask 2, and then increasing the exposure a little bit until it's exactly the way we like it. And you know, this is what I love about Lightroom, because when you're in the field and you're capturing your images, there might be just one little area that you're not really fond of, and Lightroom is going to help us to remove that area and reach our creative vision much quicker than ever before.